as soon as we get them. We now move over once again to the United States, where U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the Chinese feel that a possible deal and that recent talks have been productive. He confirmed both sides need to meet again before November the 10th and that a final agreement is expected after President Trump speaks with President Xi on Friday. While China brought a long list of demands to the table, Bessent described the negotiations as respectful and fulsome. On TikTok, Bessent says terms will be highly satisfactory for U.S. interests, while commercial details won't be revealed just yet. He says they'll come to light in the coming days or weeks. The deal still needs approval from China, but Bessent notes most terms were finalized in the spring. We're now joined by Jayjit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and finance expert, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Jayjit, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent calls these talks respectful and fulsome. Do you believe that shows some genuine thaw here in U.S. China trade tensions?
Absolutely, yes. I think you've picked up the key terms and the words that were used. Respectful is not a word that was ever used by the current U.S. administration till this particular case. So clearly it represents a more productive conversation, which was respectful to both the teams, the nations and the negotiators involved. So that gives hope to the rest of the world, because the U.S.-China trade deal is important for the rest of the world because of the significant tariffs that U.S. put in China. Chinese goods has been going to the rest of the economies and dumping them at very, very low price. They've also been choking minerals such as the rare earth metal, germanium chloride, and not just to U.S. but to the rest of the world, including key economies such as Japan and India and so on. So I think we all are waiting for a good outcome out of this deal so that we can go back to business as usual. And clearly the words spoken from by Bessler are quite positive. However, the other part of the deal was the splitting of the US operations of TikTok and moving that under a US business ownership. We haven't heard much from there. We are not sure whether that's something that's really happening or not, although there has been statements saying, which kind of indicates that maybe perhaps China is agreeing to it. But to most people who are watching the development, it doesn't seem likely that China will really agree to it. And we haven't heard the Chinese part of what really happened in that conversation.
Yes, Jayjit Bhattacharya, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme, as always. We now move over to the United States once again, where the Trump administration is set to appeal a U.S. appeals court ruling that blocks the president from firing federal Governor Lisa Cook. This marks the first time in history a president has sought to remove a sitting Fed governor since the institution's founding in 1913. On Monday, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled against the administration's bid to remove Cook, an appointee of President Biden. The court also denied a request to delay a judge's order temporarily, preventing her removal. Judge Giacob had ruled that the claims of mortgage fraud against Cook weren't strong enough to justify her dismissal. The Trump administration now has until the Supreme Court's next steps to act, with Cook expected to attend the Fed's policy meeting this week. We are now joined by Matthew Vadum. He is an American journalist and he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us here on the programme. Matthew, how unprecedented was this original move? This is the first time since the founding of the Fed, since 1913, that a US president has tried to fire a Fed governor. How extraordinary is this from President Trump?
Well, extraordinary is exactly the right word. It's unprecedented. No president had ever tried has ever tried before Donald Trump to fire a sitting governor of the Federal Reserve System. So he is the first. And the legal issue here is whether he can do it under the statute, the federal law that governs the Fed, called the Federal Reserve Act. It says that governors may be removed, members of the Board of Governors may be removed for cause. But cause has typically been understood to mean that they has been understood to mean covering their behavior while members of the Federal Reserve. Whereas Lisa Cook is accused by the Trump administration and the U.S. Justice Department of lying on mortgage documents prior to becoming a member of the Federal Reserve System's Board of Governors. So that is the precise legal issue, as I understand it, that is now appears headed to the U.S. Supreme Court after the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit rejected the Trump administration's appeal.
Yes, and could this set a precedent that politicizes the Fed in ways that we haven't seen before, possibly?
Only if Lisa Cook's firing is upheld. If it is not upheld, well, I guess, or let me rephrase that. Maybe it would set a precedent either way. But the existing, the status quo, the traditional understanding is that Federal Reserve governors cannot be fired. Trump has tried to disrupt that status quo. And so far, his efforts to do so have been rebuffed by the courts. If ultimately the courts allow him to fire Lisa Cook, then yes, that would set a precedent. Otherwise, the previous convention, the previous understanding would remain in place. Now, whether the Supreme Court will allow it is an open question. The Supreme Court has allowed President Donald Trump to fire many members of independent federal agencies, but it has been particularly protective of the Federal Reserve System. In fact, I don't recall which case it was in, but a few months ago, it made a ruling specifically saying that, or at least implying that it would be unable to allow a Federal Reserve governor to be fired because of the statutory protection, the protection afforded governors in the Federal Reserve Act. So, it would seem at the outset that President Donald Trump is fighting an uphill battle in trying to get Lisa Cook removed, but you never know what the justices of the Supreme Court are going to do. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens with that.
Yes, Matthew Verdum, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. We now move on and finish this hour